Imagine a society so consumed by pride, greed, and cruelty that it becomes blind to its own impending doom. A city where the cries of the oppressed rise like smoke to the heavens, summoning divine attention. This isn't just an ancient tale buried in the pages of Genesis. It's a mirror, and what it reflects might disturb us more than the fire that fell from the sky. In the heat of the day, Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent under the great trees of Mamre. When he looked up, he saw 3 men standing nearby. He immediately ran to meet them, bowing low to the ground. Abraham wasn't just being polite. He was responding to something deeply sacred. Among those 3 visitors was the Lord himself, veiled in human form. Abraham knew, and his actions, his agency, humility, and reverence, reflected that knowledge. He welcomed them with honor. "Let a little water be brought," he said. "Rest yourselves under this tree while I fetch a morsel of bread." But what he prepared was more than a morsel: fine flour for bread, a tender calf, curds, and milk. The offering was extravagant, a gesture of deep hospitality in a culture where to host was to protect and save at all costs. As the men ate, one spoke, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Sarah, listening from the tent, laughed to herself. She was well past childbearing age, and Abraham was no younger. The Lord, hearing her laugh, asked, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child, now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Then the mood shifted. As the meal ended and the visitors prepared to leave, they turned their gaze toward Sodom. Abraham walked with them, and it was then the Lord spoke, not just to himself but for Abraham's sake. "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do?" For the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah had become deafening. Their sin, so grievous, so complete, demanded an answer. The Lord continued, "I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me." And here we find one of the most profound moments in all of Scripture. Abraham standing before the Lord, interceding for a city on the edge of ruin. "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" Abraham asked, "What if there are 50 righteous people in the city?" And the Lord responded, "If I find 50, I will spare the whole place." Abraham pressed further, 4 to 5, 40, 30, 20, 10. Each time, the answer was the same: "I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. Such is the mercy of God, willing to spare many for the sake of a few. But 10 righteous people could not be found. As night fell, 2 of the visitors, the angels, arrived at Sodom. Lot, Abraham's nephew, was sitting at the city gate, a sign of his integration into the city's life. When he saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed low. "Come to my house," he urged. "Wash your feet and spend the night." They declined, saying they would spend the night in the square. But Lot insisted. He knew what the city had become. That night, before they had even gone to bed, the men of Sodom, young and old, from every part of the city, surrounded the house. They demanded Lot bring out the visitors so they could abuse them. What they wanted was not intimacy. It was violence, domination, humiliation. Lot went outside and closed the door behind him. In a shocking, desperate act, he offered his own daughters in an attempt to protect his guests. But the mob grew more aggressive, threatening Lot himself. The angels pulled him back inside and struck the crowd with blindness. Yet the men continued groping for the door. Such was their obsession, the blindness extending far beyond the physical. The angels warned Lot, "Do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it." Lot went to speak with his sons-in-law, but they thought he was joking. He hesitated. Even with the warning, Lot was slow to leave. So the angel seized his hand, and the hands of his wife and daughters, and led them out of the city. God's mercy once again intervened, not because of Lot's righteousness, but for the sake of Abraham. As they escaped, they were told, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back." But Lot's wife did, and in that moment, she became a pillar of salt. It wasn't simply about glancing over her shoulder. It was about longing. She turned her heart, not just her head, back to what God had condemned. Then came the judgment. The Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah. The once thriving cities of the plain were engulfed in smoke and fire, wiped from the map. All that remained was a wasteland, a grim monument to a civilization that collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Early the next morning, Abraham returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked out toward the plain and saw thick smoke rising like a furnace. The silence was deafening. The cities were gone. But what was the sin that led to such devastation? Popular culture often misrepresents it, focusing solely on sexual immorality. Yet Scripture paints a broader, more disturbing picture. In Ezekiel 16 verse 49, God says, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy." This was a city drowning in wealth and apathy, indifferent to the suffering of others. They had normalized cruelty. They had corrupted hospitality, a sacred duty in ancient culture. Instead of welcoming strangers, they sought to violate them. Instead of defending the weak, they devoured them. Instead of listening to righteous voices, they mocked them. This wasn't about isolated sin. It was about systemic evil. When Lot hesitated, the angels pulled him out. When his wife looked back, she was consumed. When Abraham interceded, God listened. And when justice came, it was both swift and absolute. This story isn't about who you love. It's about how you live. About whether you protect the vulnerable. Whether you honor the sacredness of human dignity. Whether you stand up when injustice thrives around you. It asks, do we welcome strangers, or do we fear them? Do we feed the hungry, or do we ignore them? Do we listen when God speaks, or do we scoff like Lot's sons-in-law? Because the truth is, Sodom still exists. Not in ruins beneath the Dead Sea, but in cities where greed is praised, where the poor are invisible, and where truth is silenced. The fire and brimstone weren't just punishment. They were a warning, a wake-up call to every empire that forgets mercy, a mirror held up to a world that still turns a blind eye to suffering.